Welcome to Changing the Game, where bold leaders, rule breakers, and trailblazers drop the playbook and share how they lead, win, and shake things up. Welcome to Changing the Game. Today we are chatting with Ashley Ferguson. Ashley is Chief Operating Officer at Guardian Agriculture and a former U.S. Naval Aviator. Ashley is a Top Gun graduate, Naval Academy basketball alum, and earned her MBA from MIT Sloan. Ashley has had an incredible journey, and she knows firsthand what it takes to adapt, lead, and thrive in high-stakes environments. So excited to have you here today, Ashley. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. It's great to be here.
Just for everyone listening, super excited for this episode in particular, not only because Ashley has an amazing background and I'm so excited for her to share her story, but Ashley is our first veteran on the show. So this is a real landmark episode today.
Yeah, I'm super excited to talk to you about all things, veteran, whatever we dive into. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah. Let's kick it off then right away. You have had an amazing journey. I love chatting with you on our initial call, getting to know you. So I kind of like to take it a little back to the beginning of the journey, at the beginning of the show. You played basketball at the U.S. Naval Academy. You have this amazing experience of being both an athlete and a veteran, which is very unique for, I guess, at least the people that I work with at Shift Group. Share a little bit of your journey with us. Did you always know that you wanted to go to the Naval Academy?
Not really. It's actually really funny. It's because of basketball that I ended up there. And I think, that can be sort of a common statement for folks who end up at the academy because there is just such a big emphasis on playing a sport or being active while you're involved there. But for a lot of people, it's actually what introduces you to the concept in the first place. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when I was playing basketball in high school, you're really focused, especially if you're an athlete that wants to play at the next level, you're really focused on, okay, what is the best place for me? I cared a lot at the time about what type of school I was going to go to. I was an academic. I really knew that my true future was after basketball, and my parents did a really great job instilling that hey, go somewhere where even if basketball doesn't work out or you get hurt or something happens, that you went to the school you wanted to go to. And the Naval Academy was not on that list in the early days, but their coach was really persistent, really eager. He had been recruiting me since I was a freshman. And interestingly enough, my junior going into my senior year, right, that fall of senior year was when 9/11 happened. And, I'd had some injuries. My shoulder had started acting up. All these things sort of came together to point me to, hey, why don't you give them a chance? Go look at the school, go visit Annapolis. My father was super excited because he had never been there. He would love to at least go walk around the Naval Academy campus. And that led to us driving from Massachusetts down to Annapolis in October of 2001, which you can imagine was just, we drove by the towers in New York City. They were still smoldering from the attacks 3 weeks prior. It was just a very different time in our history. And I think even as a 17-year-old, part of me could still grasp how big of a moment this was. And that extended to my visit. I stepped foot on the campus. I spent time with the team. I went to a football game. It was just so different than everything else I had experienced on other college visits. These were women who were very confident, very assertive, shook my dad's hand, called him sir, took both of us back, especially as Northerners. My dad hadn't been called sir probably ever.
Yeah.
But it just really, I think as a young, impressionable, relatively shy person at the time, I was like, these are the women I want to be like. Like, this is amazing. And it really changed the trajectory of my life because I didn't want to apply. I think I maybe applied to one or two schools just in case I didn't get in. But I left that trip, much to my parents' surprise, saying, this is where I want to go. I want to be here. I understand basketball is a part of that, but this is just, the opportunity is too big. It's bigger than me at this point, and I want to at least see if I can do it.
Yeah, wow, Ashley, that's an amazing story. And I guess I didn't know that was the timing of you deciding which school you would go to was in line with 9/11. That's crazy. You give me this energy that you are very mature for your age, thinking that
I think I sound that way now.
Well, you certainly put off that energy now for sure with your hindsight, because I think of a lot of athletes that I work with at Shift, and just certainly myself. I mean, I wasn't really thinking about academics at that point. I mean, sure, it was important to me, but I was like volleyball first or sport first. And I think it's cool that you had the knowledge and the wisdom to know that this will eventually end for me. And I don't want to have to know what's next or think about or worry about what's next. I think that's
Yeah,
interesting.
it's so true, and I really credit my parents and my coaches to an extent. My high school coach played basketball in college, and at Division 3, but he knew, hey, it's really important to focus on what you want to be good at, and if you really want to play basketball, you're certainly capable of doing that. But if especially in Division 1, right? It's so much harder. The
Yeah.
step up in skill and talent. Everybody is like you, if not better. And so you just have to hit the reality a little bit earlier that this might not be the same as it was when you were playing in high school and, relatively dominant player. And it was, I'm just really credit my parents and coaches and other mentors for instilling that in me.
Yeah, that is amazing that you felt that before you got into college too. I mean, you hit the nail on the head for me when you said that you go to Division 1 and everyone is as good or better than you.
Yeah.
So it's a huge jumping off point. When you were transitioning out of your sport then and looking at what was next for your future, do you feel like you still had a little bit of an identity shift or split after that sports career was over? Or were you confidently like, no, I'm excited to go into my service now? What was that like for you?
That's a great question. I think I was fortunate in that I slow rolled it out a little bit. When you're at the academy, it's it already sort of works. That transition starts the first day you get there because a bit of your identity is stripped away. You are now a midshipman. You learn all these principles about team and your shipmate before yourself. And that obviously extends well onto the basketball court, and our teams were relatively successful as such. But you spend every minute off the court preparing for the career you're going to have afterwards. And so for me, over the course of a couple of summers where you're introduced to all these different opportunities, it was very clear to me early that I wanted to go into naval aviation. And so it's this interesting balance where you're constantly, I think folks in the working world can relate to this. You're compartmentalizing all the time. You get to practice, you are focused on practice. You get back to school, you are focused on all the things you need to get done before the next day. And any student athlete can relate to how difficult it is to balance a Division 1 sport and an academic load. But even at the Naval Academy, I think the minimum requirement for classes is 15 credits, and typically you take 19 to
Right.
21, which is significantly more than most student athletes take.
That is a
And it's
lot.
all engineering based and it's all STEM for the most part.
Wow.
So you don't even have time to think about what is life going to be like after basketball. It almost just ends. It ends your senior year, and all of a sudden you're 2 months away from graduation, and now it's time to think about the next thing. But I was fortunate that I ended up in flight school with a lot of my teammates. Most of us went aviation. Actually, we found leagues. We played in the men's pickup leagues. We played for the local base teams. So I was active in playing basketball for a pretty long time until I just, quite frankly, in the last few years got out of shape, and now I coach.
Well, that's great that you still have the sport in your life too. I think coaching is a great transition piece to keep you involved in the sport and the love for the game going. How did you know that you wanted to be in naval aviation? You said you figured out pretty quickly. What was that experience like?
Yeah, so they do a really great job of introducing all these different summer opportunities for you. So there's a requirement to do two out of, I think they have 3 periods over the summer, and you're required to do some sort of professional commitment for 2 of those. And what that looks like is 3 weeks on a ship at one point, or 3 weeks attached to a squadron. So that could be a helicopter squadron. You could get lucky and be attached to a jet squadron. You don't really have a say. You sort of end up where the numbers put you. But I ended up with an E2 squadron. E2 is an aircraft that does airborne early warning. And the one squadron I was attached to was in Norfolk, Virginia. So it's not a bad place to be in the summer. You're effectively in
Yeah.
Virginia Beach, where I ended up living for just about 10 years anyway. Um, and you get a really deep dive into what these different communities are like, whether you're living on a ship, on a submarine, as part of a squadron. Some folks do SEAL training if that's what they want to do. And I loved the vibe of the community. I liked the lifestyle of it. I liked that you go fly. Yes, you do deployments on a ship, but you don't live on a ship full time. And just there were a lot of athletes. I just saw a lot of people that seemed like me in those when I was introduced to those different opportunities. And so for me, it was just very clear. And flying, I thought seemed like the coolest thing and the coolest way to spend a lot of my time. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing you talk about this experience because it's so incredibly foreign to me. Just the work that you do during a summer break. Like I was in the weight room still or sitting on my couch in my summers for undergrad where you were on a ship and flying and training. Can you share a little bit
and
of your
trying to work out sometimes,
yes, and
you're like, all
trying
right, I
to
have the season coming up. I have to run on a treadmill while the boat's doing this. So it's
oh my
there's tons of
gosh.
stories.
Did you ever get seasick?
Early on the smaller boats that we did, the very first summer you do this thing called YPs, yard patrol crafts, and they're these small, I think 100-foot wooden ships that are meant to replicate what a larger ship job responsibilities would look like. So you sail from the Academy up to Boston and New York City and Virginia, and you get to stay a couple nights in each port, which is really fun because you go to a Red Sox game, you go to a Yankees game, you walk around the
Yeah.
city in uniform, and people are just it was post 9/11, so people were I
Yeah.
mean, people loved, us at the time. And so um, that was really, really cool. But you're still in the back of your mind, you're like, all right, I have to get in shape for the season. I also have to do this. But to your original question, yes, I did get very seasick that first time, but you get over it quickly. Yeah,
Oh man, that would be the worst part for me, I think, is the seasickness.
it's tough.
Oh my gosh. I have horrible experience on big boats, like just fishing boats, even in just in Mexico, horrible experience. So try to stay away
Most
from
people
those.
can relate, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So kudos to you for getting over that and having to get over that quickly. Ashley, walk us through your experience transitioning out that, or not, I'm sorry, not out of the military, but out of school. So you just walk us through that story because I want
Yeah.
to hear it again. And I'm even learning so much about just the military naval world. So share that with us.
Yeah, I mean it's a really exciting it's exciting time. It's daunting. You spend the whole 4 years. When you're at the Naval Academy, it is a military college, right? And all my memories are very positive looking back on it. But when you're in it, in the thick of it, it is a tall task for a young person between the ages of 18 to 22 to sort of give up a lot of their identity. You move away from your family and friends. It's a long 4 years, and the whole time you're there, all you can think about is when you graduate. And then there's this day where it actually happens and you question, am I ready? And you almost
Right.
lock up and you almost say, oh, why did I want that to end so quickly? But the good news is, you're basically thrust right into your next thing. You don't even have time to worry about it. And so for me, I drove with a caravan of my teammates. Like I said, I think the 5 or 6 of us all went to flight school together. We drove south to Pensacola, Florida from Annapolis with walkie-talkies because I don't even think our phones could text, not to date myself too much, but I don't even know if
That's
we had text
awesome.
format. Yeah. And it took about a day and a half or 2 days to drive south, stopped in a couple places, and there we were in Pensacola. You check into your unit and then you're off to the races with flight school. So you spend 6 weeks going through this portion called API, aviation pre-flight indoctrination, and it's classroom heavy. You're taking classes on engines and you're taking aerodynamics and you have some physical requirements with swimming, and they just kind of throw everything at you. So it's a lot of tests the first 4 weeks. So you basically study for 2 days, new class test, then brand new class test. You learn about flight rules and regulations. It is fast and furious.
Yes,
And
I
then you
love it.
spend the last 2 weeks doing the physical swimming, and we were doing parachuting off the back of trucks in Alabama. It was crazy. And then if you can pass that, that's where they then bring you into the first part of flight school, which they call primary. So I spent the next 2 years in
Okay.
the various phases of flight school, knowing that I wanted to be able to select jets because I was a backseater. So I was a what they call a naval flight officer. So you're not the one flying the aircraft; you're sitting in the back seat. And for me, my options were being in a P3, which is a large plane, not unlike a boat or a 737, a Southwest aircraft. So think of something really that big down in Jacksonville or E2s in Virginia Beach, like I had done for my summer training. Or I could be in F-18s on either the East or West Coast. And that was what I wanted to do. I worked
Okay.
super hard, studied all the time. You spend a lot of time in the simulator. You're constantly prepping for your next flight. You're up early, you're up late studying. but it's also, you live in Pensacola Beach, so the weekends are fun. Academy grads, we're used to really busy, tight schedules. It was actually, I almost hate to say this, it was the most free time I'd had in a really long time because you go to class, you study a ton, and then you have your flight and your sim. But having 3 hours off during the day was so
Right.
foreign to me as a former athlete. So, I mean, you basically go to the gym and go to the beach to fill your time. So it was a really hard part of my life, but I actually look back on it pretty fondly because it was also just a lot of fun because you don't have that many responsibilities yet. You're just there to learn how to fly. And then you finally 2.5 years later go to your first squadron, where I was fortunate to select jets, and I ended up on the East Coast in Virginia Beach, and then I spent, the next 8.5 years there.
That is so awesome. So talk us through, you were a Top Gun grad. Talk about that program, or I need more clarity myself
Sure.
on the timeline. That's an amazing accomplishment too. So I want to highlight that for sure. Can you share the significance of that, what the experience was like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you enter the F-18 community, right, you spend the first 3 years learning how to do all the basics of first flying or being in the aircraft, and being a wingman, as they call it. So you're not the person leading the flight, you're the dash two in the section, or
Right.
flight of two. And then that takes 6-ish months. Then you're learning how to lead two planes. And then you spend the last year learning how to be the lead of four planes. And there's all these terms for it that I won't throw too much of it around. But it's really building blocks, right? It's learning how to be the good backseater, then the good wingman, then the good lead, and then before you know it, you're already selecting what you want to do next, and you're already up for becoming an instructor. And there's a few ways you can do that, but for me, the Top Gun opportunity was the one that I had coveted. I knew I wanted to do it since I started. They only select, I think at the time, they had 3 or 4 classes a year of about 12, 9 to 12 people per class.
Wow.
And so it's a really small group of people that go through. And I'm a competitive person. I always want to do the hardest thing. I always want to challenge myself, even if it makes life, that much harder in the near term. And there just weren't that many women doing it. And so I wanted to, go out and prove I could do it and be one of those people. Um, and so I was selected. I ended up joining the class in, I think it was September, October of 2012. So it was a while ago now. And, me and the 11 folks in my class, I knew most of them because, we had met throughout the community, or I went to college with them. But it is a tight knit group of people. Unlike the movie, there's really no competition. You're all just trying to graduate and survive, honestly. Um, but it's stressful. You are studying constantly. You're in classrooms again. There's very little to no beach volleyball like there
I
was
was
in the
gonna
first
ask, is
movie,
there
or
any
football
intense
now
beach
in the
volleyball?
second movie. I would have loved the beach volleyball. I think my class did play one day when we were on our debt in Pensacola, just because we felt like we had to do that.
Yeah, it's like a rite of
Um,
passage to do
yeah,
that.
and I loved volleyball. That was always sort of my second sport behind basketball. So anytime I could play beach volleyball, I took the opportunity. But it was honestly, we were doing it to be a bit ironic, and
Yeah.
facetious, I think. But yeah, it was a lot of heads down. It's really stressful. And I would say, it's about a 3 month course. For about the first 2 months, you really have no idea if you're going to finish, if you're going to graduate. They are intentionally very hard on you. You have, they're grooming and teaching you how to be the next generation of people that teach and hold the standard for everybody else. So it's just really long debriefs, and it's a lot of perfectionists. So, but once you get through it and you start to see the light at the end of the tunnel, you can appreciate it more. And it's honestly an accomplishment I appreciate much more now and where I am today than I probably did at the time.
I bet. That is amazing. That accomplishment, it's just insane. And I think it's even cooler that you had the mindset going in that, yeah, not a lot of women do this, but I'm going to prove myself and I'm going to do it. And I think sometimes a theme that comes up on this show is that a lot of women see themselves as one of the only. Maybe it's in their job or their training or whatever the environment is. But I would love to know what advice you have for maybe women who are newer in their career who are seeing themselves as one of the only. How did you take that and harness that as an opportunity and not as a potential setback?
That's a great question, and one I've actually thought a lot about lately. I think I have sort of two things there. One is that everyone has imposter syndrome, and I have it just like anyone else does. It gets better as you get a little bit further along in your career, but it pops up every once in a while, right? And so the best thing you can do, there's a piece of imposter syndrome that really motivates you and helps you become a better version of who you are, because you're not willing to accept, where you are right now. You want to go out there and improve upon it. But then there's the other part of it where you can't help but say, okay, I'm the only one here, or um, did I deserve to get here? And so the best thing you can do is just acknowledge it and try to move on and try to put that behind you. But the real advice is to be yourself. I think for me especially, I mean, you can imagine what a ready room is like, which is, what we call the place that the squadron spends a majority of our time. That's where we do our briefs on an aircraft carrier. That's really the only room that's dedicated to the whole group. And you look around, there's 36 to 40 other guys and you, and it's brash, it's arrogant, it's aggressive, it's what you think it is with aviators. It was also really wonderful. I met a lot of incredible friends. It was really fun, but I sort of became part of the brash group to fit in, and I was good at it because I grew up with brothers. I played basketball
Mhm.
my whole life with mostly men. I went to a college that was 90% male dominated. So I was used to it. And that experience was okay for me. But it wasn't until I was 4 or 5 years in where I realized how tiring that was. You've got this shield or this sort of facade up quite often, and you're kind of going back and forth between your work personality and your home personality. And my advice is just don't feel like you have to do that. I really went back to being a bit more of myself with more confidence and more experience under my belt. And I think I probably could have done that the whole time. Maybe it would have been a little harder to fit in right off the bat, but I think it would have allowed me to be a little bit more comfortable in my own skin for a while. And I've heard from a lot of women in my time frame that they felt the same way. I think in a good way, there's more women doing it now. And I have seen firsthand that there's so many benefits to it. But one is they often do feel more like themselves because there's just groups of women. So it's not just the one, and that helps. And then men, by in turn, are exposed to having women around more, so they let their guard down. They are more of who they are themselves, and they talk a little bit more about their families, and they open up. And I think, from a mental health perspective, on an aircraft carrier on an 8-month deployment, it's a very good thing when people can talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
So tons of positives to it. I see that trending very positively. I just hope that that is able to continue.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I totally agree with you. I think I even feel that. I mean, it's no secret Shift's a male-dominated company as well, but I have a lot of course, supportive men around me at Shift Group, which is wonderful. But it's a little bit of this masculine energy that you have to put out at times, and I think that's great advice. Like, you don't have to put up that masculine shield. Be yourself, be authentic. Your value will be
Just be
seen, and
confident.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much, Ashley. That's great. Um, I want to talk a little bit about your current career or post military career. So you ended up going to get your MBA at MIT Sloan. Can you talk a little bit of about that transition and leading into your current career?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting. I chose, in the military, when you select aviation, your minimum commitment is actually much longer than if you were to go on a ship or go into submarines or some of the other service opportunities and communities. And I think the commitment it was 8 years after finishing flights, or 6 years initially after finishing flight school, which took 2.5 years. And then when I
Right.
when I went to Top Gun, that actually added another year and a half to 2.5 year commitment. So I was looking at about 10 to 11 years minimum in my career before I could even make a decision to separate. And, for somebody that graduated in '06, right before the financial crisis and the collapse, that actually wasn't that intimidating because the job front for a lot of my friends and colleagues in equivalents in the civilian world, they were really struggling. And so I actually had this job security and I loved what I was doing and it was exciting and interesting. So when I got to about the halfway point of a retirement career, if I chose to stay in for the full 20, I just, the thing that was really kind of, that kept coming back to me was I want to go see what else I can do. I love aviation. I think I'm pretty good at it. I've done well in my career, but I'm, in my early 30s. I've got a lot of time left. And if I'm going to make a really big career pivot, I think now's the time to do it. And it's hard to walk away 9 years before you could fully retire at
Yeah.
such a young age. But I had been fortunate to have friends that had pursued their MBAs and gone that path and had either gone to Harvard Business School or Wharton or other really, top tier business schools. And it was really appealing to me because you now get to surround yourself with a whole nother group of very different individuals with very different life experiences who are also on this path to what's next in my career. And I had no idea what I wanted to do after the Navy. And I mean, we joke about Peter Pan syndrome, but it's so
Yeah.
true. Like we don't grow up. Like we get to fly this really fun jet. We go to work with our friends. There's a bit of a cycle and routine to it. And leaving that group of people who I really loved. And I mean, you're at work with your family that you're really never going to find that anywhere outside the military. That was hard, but I knew I wanted to do it. And so I got in touch with my friends that had pursued their MBAs and left the service. Was very fortunate to have a bunch of great advice on how to prep for a GMAT and how to go back to school as a 32-year-old, which is also, I was just on an aircraft carrier on a deployment, dropping bombs on targets in the Middle East. And then the next
Yeah.
month, I was in my parents' house, living home for a month before I went to business school and had to be around people in their mid 20s again. And I hadn't
Yeah.
studied in a long time. And so that was intimidating. But I think I don't regret the decision one bit. I'm glad I went to MIT. I loved the people there. It was, two of the best years of my life. And everyone there was just trying to learn. There's this like desire to help one another and learn as much as you can. Um, and I've ended up in some really cool jobs since, which I don't, maybe I would have done that without going to grad school. And maybe I would still be in the Navy today and retiring actually this year, which is crazy to think about how fast that
Wow.
time went by after I got out. Um, but I'm really, really, glad that I took the path that I did and ended up where I am today, which, as you mentioned, is at a company called Guardian Agriculture. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about the roles I had after the military too.
Yeah, let's dive into those roles after the military for sure. You went to MIT Sloan, then what? What happened there from there?
Yeah, so I spent the first summer interning at Amazon in London. Had a great experience, but what it really highlighted for me was I actually need to go figure out how to work in a civilian company. I think I'm really good at problem solving, but I'm not good at open-ended problem solving. The military is structured, but you still have a lot of autonomy and authority to run things in a way that you think is the right way to do it. But the framework is already there, like the foundation of the jobs that you're in. Other people have done them before you. You've been in the
Right.
squadron and watched how they've done them. So you're not walking into something blind. Whereas being an intern at a company like Amazon, where it's very self-driven, they really focus on self-startership. I don't even know where to start with this project. So it was very humbling. I will be the first to admit it was not the best fit for me. And so what that did was it led me back to the drawing board, and I decided consulting. As much as my first semester, that seemed like something that was also not a great work-life balance and lifestyle. It just probably was the best way to dip my toe into, the world outside the military and be exposed to a bunch of companies very quickly and work on a bunch of different projects and see how teams work. And so I ended up at McKinsey and Company in the Boston office for a year as an associate consultant. And I mean, it was a tremendous opportunity for me. I learned a ton. I had great managers, really cool projects, including one that exposed me a little bit to what life at a startup would be like. And then very fortuitously, about a year into working in consulting, right after the pandemic, or in 2020, so August 2020, really in the heat of the heart of the pandemic, I was introduced to this other startup in Boston called Merlin Labs. And so they were building autonomous aviation software, and they were looking for somebody to run operations there at a company that only had, I think 14 or 15 people at the time. And then I was there for 4.5 years. So we scaled up to 175 people, raised a couple rounds of fundraising, built a really, really great team and a great product focused on both the defense and commercial sectors. And it was really a little bit of a return to some normality for me because I was exposed to defense and we had other squadron aviators in the company. It felt like a squadron.
Yeah.
And so I got that great balance of not being in the military and having some of the more restrictive aspects of it in my life, but I got some of the great aspects of the people and being around aviation again. And I was able to see that there is actually a way you can link your past to the future. And I think for any vets listening, just lean heavily on your network. I leaned heavily on my network for the MBA. I had no idea what I was doing. I now give back as much as I can to folks that are going through that same transition because without the help I had, I'd be nowhere. So I try to pay that forward. And then when you're looking for new jobs, I now have an MIT network and a Navy network, which was important to me. And being able to go to them for advice about the companies you're considering or the opportunities that you have, or even the really micro problem you're trying to solve at your company because it's a startup and nobody knows the answer. So maybe you can go ask somebody else who's doing the same thing. I mean, that those networks are invaluable. And as veterans, I think we can feel like we are a little bit alone on an island when you're in the transition process. And I can't emphasize enough that there are so many groups out there trying to help you. And so, do the diligence, look up the ones that are the best for you, and don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help.
It's amazing advice. And I was going to ask you for that advice. So thank you for going ahead and just,
Sorry to jump in front of it. Yeah.
no, that was amazing. I was like, don't stop. That was great. Thank you so much for that advice, Ashley. I also just want to highlight, you had mentioned that you started at Amazon in London and you said, admittedly, it wasn't the best fit for me. I think a lot of candidates that I'm working with at Shift or just in general, athletes, vets, when we're transitioning out, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have to find the thing. It's like we have to have that passion or the next thing that we're amazing at. And even looking at my own story, I mean, I have had a few different jobs since I graduated, and you're not always going to find that perfect fit right away. And it sounds like it maybe, I mean, you took a couple different jobs to start to diversify your network and your experience to where you could find the good cultural fit for you where you've landed now. So
Hmm.
I don't know if you can speak a little bit to that, like any advice you have for athletes or veterans who are putting that pressure on themselves to find their fit, how you overcame maybe that a little bit of that mentality and you were able to self-reflect and say, I'm going to find the right fit for me even eventually.
Totally, totally. I think especially high performing athletes, right? You have failed a lot because to get to to get anywhere, relatively high up in a sport and be really good at what you do, there have been times where you haven't won the game or something happened or you got injured and you've had to bounce back from all these things, but you usually only focus on the climb. You don't always look at all the sort of the steps backwards along the way up. And so I think my best advice there is don't get so focused on the goal that you lose sight of what's actually occurring or what your opportunities are. I think my current company is a great example of that. I've always sort of been the kind of person that says yes to lots of opportunities. And so if someone says, "Hey, do you want to do this podcast?" I'm like, "Sure," because you meet really great people and then it introduces you to other great people and you get a chance to maybe talk to an audience you wouldn't normally, and that unlocks new opportunities. Or by being, when I was at McKinsey, going to a startup and leaving a really stable consulting job that I felt like I was starting to get really good at, I was understanding it well. That was a big risk. It's a big jump. You're putting a lot of faith in this company that you don't know that much about yet. But I found by doing that I actually love being at a startup. You have a ton of ownership. You get to operate at a very high level of independence. And I didn't realize how much I was missing that and how much I liked that. And so when 4.5 years into my last company, this company, the place I'm at now, Guardian Agriculture, reached out to ask if I'd consider being their COO. And it's an aerial spray drone company. So sure, there's a little bit of
Yeah.
aviation there, but drones are very different from fixed wing aircraft. And I didn't know anything about the agriculture industry. But for me, like the advice I have is I always think of opportunities in three buckets. There's the type of company it is. So is it a startup? Is it a big company? Is it a consulting agency? Like what is that type of company that you're interested in? Where do you fit in well? Some people love big companies. They love to go in, be an individual contributor and kind of find their niche. What is the industry? So for me, aviation, ag, what is the type of work that you're going to be doing? And then what's the role? So, I'll use the Merlin example. I was asked to go be the VP of Biz Ops at a startup called Merlin and aviate software, autonomous aviation software. I didn't really know what vice president of business operations was or what business operations was. Um, I didn't really know what it was like to work at a startup, but I knew what aviation and the air, Department of Defense and working with the folks that were going to be there was like. And so having one thing solved was enough for me to take the leap of faith. And now when, I apply that to Guardian, I knew what a COO role looked like for the most part. I'd done, portions of it. I knew what a startup was like because I just come from one, and I knew what a 50-person startup was like compared to a 200-person startup. And I actually loved that 50-person phase. But I didn't know anything about the industry. I didn't know anything about agriculture. And now I've spent the first 3 months with a fire hose learning as much as I can, and I love it. And so now, I just think if you're a person who likes to grow and learn constantly, then leave opportunity for that to be able to happen. Don't get so focused on, I want to be this person at this company, because you might miss out on some other stuff you wouldn't have considered. And it could be a really great fit.
Absolutely. You never know where your next opportunity is going to come from
Mm.
or what doors it will open for you. I'm right there with you. That great
Yeah,
advice.
just say
Thank you
yes.
so much. Yes, just say yes.
Yeah.
You said that. Say yes to a lot of opportunities, especially when you're younger, especially when you have the time and yeah, take those risks. Say yes to a lot of opportunities. Ashley, thank you so much for your time today. I know we're way over, and I want to respect the rest of your day. So I do just have one more question for you. Let's leave it at this, because this show was originally founded on the premise of encouraging women to go after those leadership positions. What do you have? What advice do you have for women who have aspirations to break into leadership roles one day?
Just don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Do the other pieces of the role that you think are going to help build those muscles and build those skills so that you can so if you want to be a chief operating officer, don't be afraid of, the finance aspect of the job, even if that's not your background or your strong suit. Learn as much as you can from other people. Don't be afraid of taking a chance on something that might not be what you think is the perfect fit right now, but will help you learn and get to the position you want to be in later. Quite frankly, a lot of people are learning as they go. Anybody that seems like they've got it all together and they know everything about everything doesn't. I can tell you that. I've seen behind the curtain. And also, there's a reason, that a lot of leaders at companies are really experienced and later in their career. It's because they've done all those things along the way. So don't be discouraged if there are aspects of it that aren't working out right off the bat. Just keep building all the skills that you need. And then don't be afraid to take a chance on something. Don't be afraid of failure. You'll have an opportunity to bounce back and go try something else, even if it doesn't seem like that at the time. So just, again, take the opportunity, build the skills, and then lean on your network. Talk to other women that are doing it, and they will tell you, and all, they'll be very, very open with you about what worked, what didn't work. And it's just always helpful to have other women to bounce ideas off of and to have in your network.
100%. Thank you so much, Ashley, for your time. This was awesome. So high level. I learned so much. I know our audience definitely did too. So I really appreciate your time. I feel like there's maybe a part two in our future if you'd be wanting to come back, because
I'd
there's so
love
much
to.
more I want to cover.
I love what you all are doing, and I just can't I can't say thank you enough for supporting women, supporting veterans. It can be really, really intimidating out there, especially for veterans who are going through the transition process and leaving behind everything they've ever known. So I'm just always very appreciative of groups like this and what you're doing.
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom today. And we'll chat again soon. Thank you.